Next speaker in this session is Alan Karr, Director Emeritus of the National Institute of Statistical Science and now working at the Fraunhofer Institute. Let's welcome Alan.
I know I'm nearly standing in the way between you all and the reception, so hopefully some of the things I'll say will be enough to keep you going until the reception. I'm not as smart as all the other speakers here, so I'm going to substitute breadth for depth in the number of cases. Ado had asked me to, although I have never actually held a position in the federal government, to sort of speak from that perspective since I've been associated with the federal government in a lot of ways. I'm going to use that as an excuse to do some other things as well. So I'm really going to touch briefly on three things. The first one is data collection activities by the federal government, aka official statistics. Some things about healthcare, which you actually are going to see will tie with some of the things you've heard from the other speakers today. And then finally, with some comments about human considerations, which I think all of us need to be mindful of. So just to sort of lay out the landscape, unlike most countries, the U.S. has a highly fragmented national statistics system. Here's the challenge to get you through to the reception. If you can hand me a piece of paper that decodes all these acronyms, I'll buy you a drink. But more to the point, it's a very diverse and sort of domain-driven statistical system. And there are a lot of issues that are being faced. It's also, it's very important. Some of you, I hope, at some point have participated in federal surveys. Not only do they generate scientific understanding, but there also are a significant amount of money at stake. So what's going on in the survey world in very sort of crude terms at this point? For a number of years, response rates have been going down. They're now perilously close to being below standards. Costs are skyrocketing. There is more and more need to integrate data from multiple sources, and this, I think, actually is going to be an opportunity for AI, because you can't just leave this all to humans to try to sort out which columns in one data set actually map onto which columns in some other data set. And then the whole world of survey data collection, and I mean this literally because this has hit basically every country, has just been turned upside down by COVID. So let me just talk briefly about some potential roles for artificial intelligence. Some of these things, if there's one person in the audience this talk is an homage to, it's Don Rubin, because you're going to see his ideas and concepts that he generated sort of throughout the talk. So because of the costs and the need for high quality data, there's a lot of effort devoted to editing responses, which may be measurement errors, they may be lies on the part of survey respondents. They may represent a lot of things, and they also, sort of parallel to that, is imputing values of data elements that are missing. And this is a setting where spending money to increase the value of the data that you already have is actually worthwhile. And so there are wonderful ideas, many of them from Don and his intellectual successors for dealing with editing and imputation, but also a widespread belief that the relationships are so complex that AI-type models might be relevant. A second area, as you can see there, is creation of synthetic data. Among the things I've done in my career, I worked for a number of years at RTI, which is a leading federal contractor, and RTI has a synthetic population, which is basically the entire US population broken into households with simulated variables and can be used for a variety of purposes, but it hasn't yet been integrated with anything related to AI. So using, for example, the synthetic population and GANs, generalized adversarial networks, to generate synthetic data strikes me as a really intriguing and interesting opportunity. Finally, and I think this really cuts across, it certainly is a theme that was raised by Alex in his talk about the stakes of the decisions that are being made, at least in the federal world, this question of fitness for purpose. And maybe there is a whole lot of energy and effort and time and money being devoted to collecting data that are really overkill with respect to the sort of principal purposes. And this is something, this is kind of a warning to those of you in academia and elsewhere. If you're used to using federal data in your research, watch out, because you may be at risk as the government takes sort of an increasingly sharp view of how much data they need to collect and how good those data need to be. So you're not going to see many formulas, probably not any in this talk, but very quickly, synthetic data are out there. This is actually shameless self-promotion. This is quoting myself because I couldn't find a quote from Yogi Berra that was equally apropos. Those of us who are producers of these kinds of techniques need to keep the decisions in mind and need to remember that our customers may not really be turned on by some of the things we're doing, and that we have to understand what the decisions are and how best to be able to support those. So just a couple of closing comments on this one. The first one is a caution in the sort of federal contracting world. There has been a huge rush to rebrand what you've been doing for 20 years as AI, and I suspect that's not the only place where that's happening. It's probably just the one I happen to be most familiar with. Privacy, which is something I have a particular interest in, is something to also to pay attention to. Medical uses of AI have been mentioned already. Here are just three of what I think of as success stories. The two covers from Science are actually within the past 3 months. Diagnostic radiology has already been mentioned. It turns out that basically AI is in the process of replacing the old sort of physics-based protein folding models. And then there are sort of patient-centered sides, things like fraud detection. So what I see as potential opportunities here, a lot of the AI-like work I've seen in healthcare doesn't really pay enough attention to uncertainties. So those of us who view our role as being honest and as complete and accurate as possible about uncertainties, they're there. I mentioned synthetic data before. I'm going to have to start skipping some of these because time is fleeting. Something that's out in the engineering world, but which is starting to enter the medical world and others, is the concept of digital twins. So, for example, in engineering, General Electric, which I guess is no longer going to be General Electric. It's going to be 3 separate companies as of sometime soon. Every aircraft engine they build, they create a digital twin of it, and it is sort of updated with ongoing operational and other data, and it's used to guide maintenance policies and to improve design. So it makes sense that at some point we would be able to do clinical trials using digital twins of real people. We may be able to do them at larger scale with more diverse participants. Let me just skip this one because it will take too long to explain it, and just finish up with some comments on human considerations, because I think this is actually a place where one of the themes that's kind of come up today, and which I completely agree with. I mean, it is so wonderful to be in front of at this point, but earlier in the day in a live audience. So we need to kind of keep in mind that there's a human side to this, and that we as researchers and sort of methodologists and creators of tools, I mentioned before, keeping in mind, that our customers may well be decision makers who are not as enamored of what we do as we are, so that we need to sort of keep that in mind. Some of this is what you read about in the popular press, and some of it isn't. I mean, there are going to be real threats to people's livelihoods if AI tools are misused. And I just wrote down a couple of examples there where I think the tools are starting to be used. HR, for those of you who don't know what it means, it's human relations. So this is relating to things like employment decisions. I mean, I'm old enough now that I don't sort of worry a lot about employability, but there is a chance that our children and grandchildren, they're going to be genetically tested, and their employer is going to look at what's going to be the effect of hiring this person on my medical benefits program, because some people are going to be a lot more expensive to pay their benefits. So there are issues about loss of freedom. Surveillance has already kind of been raised, so in some ways that's a little bit of old hat. Pre-trial release is in the news a lot, and this is another one where there is an important effect, and just sort of basic loss of humanness. And if you want to know why I'm a big fan of Charles Blow, and this is a column that he wrote in response to the announcement made by Mark Zuckerberg. You can ask me that at the reception. So just finishing off with a few of the threads that I think run throughout this. There are going to be standards for AI. NIST is already working on them. They will relate to things like safety. For instance, autonomous vehicles. There's not a chance. I mean, I actually do a lot of work with transportation engineers, and I feel no hesitancy in standing here and saying autonomous vehicles are not going to be widespread in my lifetime, and it's not because I expect my lifetime necessarily to be short. Privacy. At least I would say incremental lifetime. Yeah. Privacy, I already mentioned. Regulation is coming, and we can either sort of stand by and have it happen to us, or somehow try to be engaged in the process. And now, I'm thinking of us as tool builders and sort of scientists, but also as customers. The PCC from science, there's a difference between explainable AI and interpretable AI, and this is going to become important. The European Union has already begun to create standards for that. But there are interesting things here. According to these authors, and I think their constructs are right, interpretable AI essentially means wimping out and using a simple model because you may have to explain it in court or some other case. Explainable AI, which is much more interesting, is to build a simple model of a complicated model. So you have your deep learning network, which is not readily interpretable by anybody, but you build a simple model of it and use that, and that's what these guys consider to be explainable AI. It turns out we statisticians have been doing that for a number of years in a totally different context, which is building fast simulators of things like climate models and weather models that in the sort of computer experiments. Finally, adversarial AI is already here. I'm involved in my work at the Fraunhofer Institute with a team of software engineers and bioinformatics people, computational biologists. And one of the problems we're trying to worry about is that there are now online services where you can order DNA sequences. You just sort of send in your sequence and it can be synthesized for you. Right now, there are very rudimentary checks to make sure you didn't ask for something like the CoV-SARS-2 spike protein or other known toxic sequences. I actually know how to defeat most of those by basically chopping up a request and then using CRISPR to reassemble the pieces. But you know, as the tools get more and more widespread, there are going to be adversarial situations. I mean, we've all seen these pictures where you add to something what looks like noise and it's shifted over a neural network classifier boundary and gets changed from a cow to a dog or something like that, or more to the point, from a pedestrian to a stop sign or something like that. So the closing message is, sort of a plea now that we are back as people again and being able to interact face to face. We need to as researchers, need to keep in mind that what we're doing does affect people, and we need to do as much as possible to make sure that those effects, are understood, and as they are understood, are as beneficial as possible. So with that, I'll stop pontificating. Thank you all for your attention, and now I think I get to duel with Don about whatever he wants to raise.